For numbers 1 and 2, you have some literal equations is what we call them. They're typically formulas, but what you're asked to do is to solve for the indicated variable. So to solve doesn't mean you're going to get a number answer. It just means to get that variable isolated. So on number 1, it says you're solving for h. So that means you want to get h by itself on one side of the equation. So everything that's on the side with it needs to go away. So in this case, we have a 1/3, a pi, and an r squared that's going away. Now this is the formula for the volume of a cone, but that's not necessary in order to solve for h. I put on your summer packet that it is important that you notice some of the letters are capitalized and some are lowercase, and we'll talk about that throughout the year. But things that you have to calculate to find, such as volume and surface area, perimeter, those types of things are capital letters, whereas dimensions like height and radius, height and number 2, those are always going to be lowercase letters. So make sure that you try to honor the way that they were given to you. If it's capitalized in the problem, keep it capitalized throughout your process. If it was lowercase, keep it lowercase. So to get h by itself, we already talked about what we need to get rid of, and so what I look to see is what operation is occurring between the variable I'm trying to get by itself and the things that I'm trying to get rid of, which are the 1/3 pi and r squared. Well, all of this, since they're just written next to each other without any addition or subtraction symbols, I know is just multiplication. So typically I would use division to get rid of course, multiplication, because they're inverse operations of one another. But since I have a fraction, I don't want to divide by a fraction. That just gets into a really messy problem. You don't ever want 2 fraction bars in your answer. So you wouldn't want to write v divided by 1/3, because then you have 2 division symbols. So instead, when you have a fraction that you're trying to get rid of, you want to multiply by the reciprocal. And remember, reciprocal just means you're going to flip that fraction over. So for instance, if I had a 2/3 that I wanted to get rid of, I would multiply both sides, of course, by 3/2. I would just flip that fraction. So you can notice if you multiplied across, you would get 6 in the numerator and 6 in the denominator, which is just a 1. So you've gotten, in essence, rid of that fraction. So in our problem, since I see the fraction to begin with, I'm going to begin by getting rid of that fraction. I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal of 1/3, which is 3/1, which we know is just 3. So I'm going to begin by multiplying both sides of this equation by a 3. So I can see this 3 times 1/3, I know 3 is the same thing as 3/1. So if I were to multiply across, I would get 3 in the numerator and 3 in the denominator. And 3 divided by 3, of course, is 1. So this cancels out, and now on the right side of the equation, I'm just left with pi r squared h. On the left side, since I had to keep it balanced, doing that to both sides, I have 3 times v, which I can just write as 3v. So remember, we're still trying to get h by itself, and we haven't accomplished that yet. We just got rid of the 1/3. Now, getting rid of the pi and the r squared doesn't mean I have 2 more steps involved, because there's only one operation that I need to undo. All of this is multiplication. So I can undo that multiplication in one step. I know division undoes multiplication. So I'm going to divide by what I'm trying to get rid of, which is the pi and the radius squared. But to keep it balanced, we know we have to do the same thing to both sides of an equation, so I'm going to divide the other side by pi r squared as well. Well, a number divided by itself, we know is just 1. So that pi and that pi cancel, and that radius squared and that radius squared cancel. So I have now gotten my h all by itself. So what is h equal to? It is equal to 3 times v, or 3v, divided by pi r squared. So that would be my final answer, solving for h. On number 2, we're also solving for h. So to get h by itself, I've got a p in front. That's a capital P. That means perimeter is what that stands for. This is S, that's surface area. This is for the surface area of a prism, if you want to know what this formula is for. That surface area is equal to perimeter times height plus 2 times the base area. That's a capital B. So we're solving for h. So to get h by itself, I want to get rid of this p, and I also want to get rid of this 2 and this b. But that's all one term, so I'm going to be getting rid of 2b all at one time. So again, I'm going to ask myself, what do I need to undo in order to get rid of those variables? Well, to get rid of the p, I would be undoing multiplication. We know when two variables are written next to each other, then that means they're being multiplied together. To get rid of the 2b, it's being added to the h, so I would be undoing addition. So let's think back to equations that you've solved in algebra. If I gave you this problem here, well, you know to get x by itself, you would be undoing multiplication and undoing addition. Hopefully you remember from algebra that you do the order of operations backwards when you're undoing a problem, when you're solving an equation. So we actually undo addition before we undo multiplication. And so we know on this equation we would begin by subtracting 3 from both sides. Well, it's the same thing I'm going to do here. I want to undo that addition of 2b, so I'm going to subtract by 2b. And I know to keep it balanced, I have to do the same thing to the other side of the equation, so I'm going to subtract 2b on the other side. So we know this is a positive 2b, this is a negative 2b. Those simply cancel each other out because that equals 0. On the left side, it's really important that you write this in the correct order since it's subtraction. So we know subtraction is not commutative. 7 minus 3 and 3 minus 7 are not the same thing. So the order matters in how you write this. So notice the s is positive. The 2b is what has the subtraction sign in front of it. So when I write that, I'm going to write s minus 2b, not 2b minus s, because then that would put that negative sign in front of the s, and s is positive. So on the left side, s minus 2b. On the right side, we got rid of the 2b, so all we're left with is ph. And again, capital S, capital B, capital P, lowercase h. So now to get h by itself, I only need to get rid of the p. And remember, what operation is that? That's multiplication. So what undoes multiplication? Division does. So I'm going to divide by what I'm trying to get rid of, which is just the p. And I have to keep it balanced, so I'm going to have to divide this entire side by p as well. So a number divided by itself is 1, so those p's cancel, and I have h by itself. So what is h equal to? It is equal to s minus 2b all divided by p. So it's really important that that fraction bar goes under that whole subtraction expression right there to show the whole thing's being divided by p.